Does that do something for the audio?
It can help, sure.
Excellent. OK. All right. OK, we'll get started. So thanks for joining me today. My name's Dan. I have been a strength and conditioning coach for 15 years. I've been a registered physiotherapist for 5. And I think that dealing with injuries can be a really frustrating process. But I also think that that is the case unnecessarily, because there are some really simple and effective strategies that we can use to positively get back to activity, to reduce the degree to which we are unable to exercise, and in turn, that can positively affect our mental and physical health. And I'm really excited to share them with you today, because I am what you would consider to be a huge nerd about this stuff. And I hope that that contributes to an exciting and engaging talk. Before we start, by a show of hands in this very filled room, who has ever dealt with an injury ever? I'm going to put both my hands up, because I've had plenty. Excellence. Not excellence in the sense that you've been injured, but excellence in the sense that this will hopefully be relatable. So we're going to talk about 4 things today. We're going to talk about how we prevent injuries. We're going to talk about how we speed up recovery for the injuries that we can't prevent. We're going to talk about everything that you need to know about pain in the context of an injury. And we're going to finish with a discussion around how we navigate pain in a way that allows you to get stronger and continue exercising despite the fact that you're in pain. So you might be somebody with a previous or present injury. You might be a caregiver for somebody with a previous or present injury. Virtually 100% of us will deal with injuries at some point in our lives, whether minor or major, hopefully minor. But knowing what to do and how to move forward is really important. We want to know what to do versus what not to do if the goal is to recover from injury or prevent it from happening in the first place. So we're going to start with the basics, which is what is an injury? And in short, an injury is a system failure. So any activity that you do, load is imposed on the various systems of the body. And we want to define what that system is. It might be a muscle, it might be a joint, it could be a series of joints like the spine, it could be an entire limb like the arm or the leg. When the load that's present exceeds the capacity that that system has for bearing load, we get some sort of failure of the tissues, and we characterize that as an injury. And that can happen really acutely in the moment, like I fall and trip on the ice, I strain a muscle lifting something heavy, and it can also happen chronically in the case of something like tendinitis in the shoulder, where we have this ongoing exceeding of capacity over time, but it happens ever so slightly and over a prolonged period. And then the last point here is that not all injuries cause pain, but we're going to get to the pain point in just a little bit. So if we want to think about preventing injuries, we have to understand what sorts of factors affect load and what factors affect capacity, because all of injury rehab essentially boils down to the constant interplay between these two sides of the coin. So let's start with load. Load is effectively what is the degree of physical stress that's being imposed on the body or parts of the body. And the first factor here is activity intensity. How hard is the thing that you're doing? In the gym, we can quite literally measure the load. So we can look at how much weight is being lifted over the course of a set, over the course of a day, over the course of a week of exercise. And outside of the gym, this is more about how hard the challenge or the impact of the activity is on you. So if you are a road cyclist, are you doing hills? Are you doing flat ground, or a combination of both? If you are doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu, are you doing light technique work, or are you going all out in a grappling match? These sorts of things will dictate how hard the activity is on your body, but so will your tolerance for the positions or the movements that you're performing. So I could walk just like a regular walk, standing straight up. I could also walk with my hands around my ankles, and the second is going to be much more load intensive on my back or my hips. So the second factor is how long am I doing the activity for, and how frequently am I participating in it over the course of the week. So that might be 30 minutes of activity 2 to 3 times a week. It could be 5 hours of activity every day. Am I doing the activity multiple times a day? And then we also want to consider the rest that's present. So rest in between activity sessions, as well as rest in the context of the activity. So between sets at the gym, or if I'm moving houses, how many boxes am I bringing into the truck before I sit down and I take a bit of a breather? If we want to increase or decrease the load that's present, these are the parameters that we have to play with. So if we're injured, we want to temporarily reduce the load that's present. And if we're trying to move from whatever our baseline is to a higher degree of physical proficiency or fitness, we want to increase the load, but in a sustainable fashion. And then on the other side of the equation, we have capacity. So this is our capability to tolerate load. And this is determined by a couple of different factors. And the first of these is the tissue in question. Is that a muscle? Is it a tendon? Is it a ligament? Is it a nerve? Generally speaking, we want to know how good the tissue is at absorbing force, or in the case of a muscle, producing force. And the larger the tissue is, the more it's going to be able to resist, or in the case of muscles, produce force. If my biceps are bigger, my biceps are going to be stronger as a result. We want to think about what the individual's baseline physical proficiency is, what is their fitness level. And then your anatomy is also important here. So some people are better built for certain positions or activities. We can't fit everybody into this one bucket of this is the one way to move and it's the only way to move. Some of us have hips that project sideways versus forwards. Some of us have flatter feet versus higher arches. Some of us have broader shoulders and longer wingspans. And we have to take that into equation. The other thing that we have to take into equation is what is your tolerance for the position in question. So if I ask you to hold a box up at shoulder height, are you holding it close to your chest or are you holding it far in front of you? Neither position is necessarily wrong, but one of those positions will be much more sustainable to maintain in the grand scheme of things. We also want to consider injury history. So has there been anything that's happened that will influence your ability to participate in activity? Let's say you've dislocated your shoulder once in the last 10 years and you've dislocated your shoulder 10 times in the last year. Those are two very different shoulders, and we have to take that into account here. And so one of the things that I didn't mention previously, but I think was on the slide, was that when we are dealing with an injury, the capacity that's present is diminished, our capacity for tolerating load. So if your shoulder is hurt, you can't lift your kids as easily. You can't bring in as many groceries in as you normally would. You can't swing your tennis racket as easily as you could if you weren't injured. We also want to consider pieces of supportive equipment, things like knee braces, ankle braces, tennis elbow straps. We use these sorts of things to temporarily improve the capacity of the system. Things like shoes are also supportive pieces of equipment. So we use them to walk on and tolerate harder surfaces better and to walk further distances. And this is going to be present in all sports and all realms of life. So construction workers will use excavators to haul more dirt over a given period. Track and field athletes use track spikes to run faster. Swimmers use swim caps to swim faster. It's all the same sort of idea. And then we have a couple of factors that are a little bit less mechanical in nature. So the first of these is stress. If you are carrying excessive levels of stress, which most of us are in this day and age, you're going to be imposing that degree of stress on your body, and it's going to inhibit or diminish your ability to tolerate higher levels of activity. And that's going to be the case with emotional stress, but also physical stress, like if you're sick or you're dealing with a fever or something like that. The next one is sleep, which we can best assess with the question, are you waking up feeling well rested? And if you aren't, can we invoke strategies that work to improve sleep quality and sleep quantity such that you do wake up feeling more well rested? And if you do wake up feeling well rested, you're in the minority, which is unfortunate, but good that you are. Good that you're waking up feeling well rested, but it's generally a good indication that you're tolerating the stressor of the prior day or days. After this, we have nutrition and hydration. Are you adequately fueling and hydrating your body in anticipation of the things that you're going to go through on a given day? And then the last consideration is any underlying medical conditions that might affect your ability to participate in activity. If you have asthma, if you have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, these things will limit your lung capacity, and that needs to be considered in the grand scheme of things. So when we're thinking about preventing injuries, we have to first acknowledge that all activities that we do, including exercise, including physical activity, carry some degree of risk. Just like there is a risk of, God forbid, getting into a car accident when you get behind the wheel, anything from exercise to cooking to video games to playing an instrument carries with it a risk of tweaks or aches or strains or sprains, maybe even big injuries. But the benefits of an active lifestyle far outweigh the risks of a sedentary one. And so a primary goal with activity is to consistently minimize the risk of injury that's being imposed. And we can do that really reliably by addressing factors that are specific to the person, the activity, and the environment in the context of the activity. So ultimately, we're trying to facilitate safe and productive and potentially fun activity that we can replicate and progress in a consistent manner. So the goal is get hurt as little as possible so you can keep doing the thing that you're trying to do. So all of these factors are going to interplay off of each other, but we'll start with activity. Is the person prepared for the load in question, and is it an appropriate time to attempt that load? So are we trying to lift something heavy when we're in a really fatigued state? Is the movements that we're doing, are we competent performing that movement at the level or intensity in question, or am I trying to max out a lift at the gym within a couple of days or weeks of learning that movement? And then furthermore, do we possess the prerequisite mobility required for that movement? So if I can't lift my arms over my head, performing a repetitive task where I'm placing something on a shelf above me might be a bit of a recipe for disaster until I can develop further mobility to get into that position a little more easily. We also want to consider if the individual is warmed up and ready for the activity at hand. Are you primed? Are you prepared? Or did you show up to your Saturday afternoon squash match and you throw on your shoes and boom, all of a sudden you're running at 130% intensity? That might be a bit of a recipe for disaster. Is there anything going on from injury to sickness to injury, past or present, that might be relevant, that's going to influence the degree to which we need to listen to our body? From an activity standpoint, is the movement that we're selecting actually appropriate for us? Or are we trying to hang from the monkey bars, having recently sustained a rotator cuff strain or tear? That might not be the smartest idea. Is there an unnecessary amount of risk being imposed, and can that risk be mitigated? So the best example I have here is if you go to the gym and you see somebody who's trying to train both their stability and their strength by performing a barbell back squat when a bar is on their back and they're sitting down while they're standing on a Bosu ball, which is one of those half moons with the squishy underneath and the flat on top. Hopefully you're not this person, but if you are, can we swap the bar on the back for a weight by the chest? Or taking it one step further, can we accomplish the goal as a whole in a safer manner altogether? Can we separate the two components? You do your squats for strength, and then you do your balance exercises for balance. From an environment standpoint, is the space that you're in clean and tidy? Or are you trying to bring your groceries in and there's kids' toys scattered all over the floor that increase the risk that you're going to trip and sprain your ankle? This is going to create an unpredictable environment. Is the equipment that you're using working and functional? Or are you going for a bike ride and your bike is missing some screws? Are you going skating and your skates are missing a blade? To some degree, we need to be aware of what or who is around us at all times when we're participating in activity. And so the example here would be, I'm out on a run, I'm running on the sidewalk, and a bit of a ways ahead, walking in the same direction that I'm running so they don't see me, are two people standing shoulder to shoulder blocking the sidewalk. I might be able to yell out at them, hey, I'm coming on your left, or maybe I'm too out of breath and I can't yell at them, or maybe they're just rude and they don't necessarily listen. But acknowledging what's going on is going to allow me to act proactively rather than reactively. So maybe as I get closer, I realize, hey, there's a car on the left. Actually, I need to go on the flat patch of grass around on the right. And this is why it's really important to know what's going on and who is around me at all times. As much as we can minimize the risk of it, though, injuries do happen. And so when they do, having the mindset and strategies to move forward in a smart and productive manner will drastically influence the trajectory of your recovery. So I'm going to share with you now 4 secrets I have to minimizing the risk and impact that injuries impose that will allow you to quickly and effectively bounce back to your baseline and beyond, no matter the injury that you're dealing with. This is a catch-all. The first is do what you can when you can. If your capacity is limited, it's really important to take stock of where you're at such that you can bring yourself to where you're not. And what this means exploring is what are the weak links in your chain and which of these can you improve while appropriately mitigating the risk of further aggravation to the injury. So when we think of the word fitness, we're really just referring to this collection of 10 traits on the right here. Strength, endurance, mobility, balance, power, speed, flexibility, accuracy, coordination, agility. I might have said one of them twice. For most of us in the room, the low-hanging fruits typically are going to be strength and endurance and stamina and flexibility and balance, and that may or may not be the case for you. But if it is, there are still 5 other domains that exist, and you have to consider which of these could you benefit from improving. So particularly during a period where you might be injured, strength per se of the injured area might be a difficult area to focus on, but there's still other realms that we could focus on: stamina, speed, flexibility, etc. And employing this strategy is going to allow you to minimize the degree to which you become deconditioned or weak as a result of taking time off of the injury. So maybe improving your stamina, for example, while you can't focus on upper body range of motion, will ensure that you have as big of a work tank as possible when you come back to exercise and activity. What do what you can when you can doesn't mean is inappropriately loading tissues, metaphorically bashing your head against the wall by just throwing weight on the barbell in the gym in the hopes that the injury will magically disappear. And it also means that when you have your first pain-free day in weeks, you don't just jump back into your pre-activity intensity as if nothing ever happened. We have to be smart and precise about our return to activity, particularly if we've been away from the thing for a longer period of time, whatever the word activity means to you. The second strategy is don't pick the scab. And so if a particular position or activity or movement is painful, don't go there 10 or 30 or 50 plus times a day just to see if things feel better. In the vast majority of cases, things take time to recover, and constantly assuming an aggravating position may further sensitize the body to the pain response. And this doesn't mean that we want to aim to stiffen up and demonize movements and not perform any movements at all hours of the day, definitely not. But we want to make sure that this metaphorical scab has ample opportunity to heal. So getting up first thing in the morning and loosening up and stretching out is a really nice way to take stock of what is the state of the union of the body for that day. And maybe there's been some improvement, maybe there hasn't. But if we notice that a particular movement is painful, like lifting my arm over my head, we want to take that information, put it in the back pocket. We don't want to ignore it. It's important to acknowledge it. But don't pull it out 30 times a day just to see that it's still there. We have to consider that the longer a scab is present for, the more we pick it off over and over again, the longer it's going to take to heal and the more sensitive the tissue is going to become. The third key, and this is a really important one, is to measure progress in as many ways as we can. We want to have some key parameters that will give a clear indication as to where our baseline is with respect to the rehab process, and these are going to be very different for everybody. So for a recreational gardener, I might be interested in how many minutes of gardening do they tolerate before their pain climbs to an inappropriate threshold. For a football player, I might be interested in their 1-rep max deadlift. So it's very specific to the person and their needs. There's a lot of different factors that we can pay attention to. Generally, I'm looking for you to make progress in all, if not most of these areas. So the first is, how well do we tolerate a given activity, and can we progressively extend the length and frequency within what we're able to participate and tolerate participating in? The next is, how challenging is the activity? So we can rate our difficulty from 1 to 10, 10 being the hardest, and we can look for meaningful progression in terms of how hard something is over a given period of time. So maybe my stamina is limited, and walking around the block is a 7 out of 10 difficulty. And then after a couple of weeks of exercise training, that 7 turns into a 4. That's progress. Or maybe bringing in the groceries is quite a strenuous task for me, and I have to take a lot of trips with a very large number of bags, and I spend a couple of weeks improving my strength, and we find that after a couple of weeks, I'm able to take fewer trips with a fewer number of bags. That's a strong indication that I'm getting stronger. We can also look at confidence. How confident do you feel during a given task, a given bout of activity, a given lift? Does something that you're doing currently make you nervous? And can we get this gradual exposure effect that it suddenly becomes a little bit more, we feel more confident in our ability to do the thing? How fast can we accomplish a given task, and can we make that happen any faster? Does it take 60 minutes to rake the leaves normally, and we can get that down to 45? And then the last factor, or the primary one if you're dealing with an injury, is pain. How much pain are we experiencing with activity, with a given bout, length, speed of activity? All of these prior factors we can take pain and apply it to, and we might just be able to rate it from 1 to 10, or look at, is there pain, is there not pain? And we can use that to assess, are we making progressions, are we making improvements? And ultimately, most of these factors are going to be pretty correlated, so as we see improvements in one, we're probably going to see improvements in the rest of them. But there are quite a number of puzzle pieces that make up the puzzle, and we don't want pain to be the one puzzle piece or the puzzle in and of its entirety. And I want to emphasize this idea here that seeds become forests. So consistent action taken over long periods of time will maximize the probability for success. Choosing to take no action whatsoever will minimize that same probability for success, probably down to 0. So just as seeds eventually become forests, the more seeds that you are planting, or the more meaningful activity that you can tolerate, it's almost like you're throwing grains of rice into a bucket one at a time. It might seem meaningless, it might seem frustrating, difficult in the moment, but these activity sessions add up just as they would if you weren't injured. So the last key is listen to your body because you know it best. Sometimes rest is warranted. There are some circumstances where the most reasonable course of action is to temporarily not participate in activity. The immediate hours following a concussion, unstable fractures, organ sepsis. There are some circumstances where low-level activity is warranted. If you are dealing with a fever, it might not be reasonable to just jump back into your there we go. If you're dealing with a fever, it might not be reasonable to jump back into your pre-activity intensity as if nothing had ever happened. We might want to go for a walk to get the heart and lungs pumping a little bit, and that walk might be 500 meters, it might be 50 meters, it might be 5 meters. And we see this in the ICU all the time, where physio gets patients up and running, because not necessarily running, but up and walking, because we know that it facilitates a quicker and more effective recovery. And then we might have some circumstances where we just want to modify activity to a little bit of a degree. So lifting 20 to 60% of your normal weights at the gym just to get the muscles fatigued and activated. So the analogy here is this. If you get a sunburn from spending a full day outside in the sun, the question to be asked is, would you consistently spend the same amount of time outside in the days that follow? Hopefully not. But on the other side of the equation, would you avoid going out into the sun for the next 40 years? No, of course not. So in that same regard, we can't just assume that the body will acclimate to whatever it gets exposed to. We need to be smart and precise and think about, are we listening to how we're feeling throughout the process? So bringing it back to activity, let's say you hurt your back lifting something heavy off the floor. The next day you wake up and your back's a little sore, maybe there's some pain, maybe there's frustration that you weren't able to lift the thing that you were trying to lift. Should you try the lift again the next day? Or on the other side of the equation, should you avoid lifting anything off the floor ever for the rest of your life? And the answer is no, of course not in both regards. We want to spend some time allowing the tissue to heal up. Then we might want to spend some time better acclimating to the position or the load in question. So strengthening our back and our hip muscles, improving our lifting technique, and eventually it will become a more appropriate time to perform that lift. But we do want to make sure that we're listening to how we feel throughout the process. So in short, we want to make sure that if you are injured, the secret the big rehab doesn't want you to know is you have to limit your participation in excessively aggravating activities and maximize your participation within the realms of consistent tolerability. You have to go all in on what you can do and create an action plan to avoid the things that you can't do or to work back up from the things that you can't do, and use your best judgment to avoid making the situation worse. And remember this idea that seeds become forests. Consistent action taken over long periods of time will maximize the probability for success, but choosing to take no action whatsoever will certainly reduce that same probability to zero, which we want to avoid. So something that we've been bouncing around for the last couple of slides is the idea of pain. So let's delve into it a little bit. Pain is essentially this unpleasant experience that is associated with tissue damage, but also occurs when the brain is exposed to the threat of tissue damage. So generally speaking, we could think of pain as similar to a smoke alarm system. A smoke alarm is going to go off if there is a fire, and you want it to because it alerts you to the fact that you probably need to get out of the house. But that same smoke alarm might go off if you're making toast in the toaster. And it depends on a lot of factors. How sensitive is the alarm? How dark is the toast getting? Is the smoke alarm directly above the toaster? And so in relation to pain, pain does not equal tissue damage. It may indicate tissue damage, but the sheer presence of pain is not a guarantee of it. So pain acts as this adaptive role. It serves this very protective mechanism in that the pain response tells you, hey, be cautious with what you're doing. I'm watching you. I'm paying attention here. And this is really great in theory because we have this system that's ready to alert us to the presence of potential danger if we continue to engage in a particular activity. However, if we base our activity participation solely on the presence or absence of pain, it can lead to adverse effects on function and social and psychological well-being. If we are in pain and we feel compelled as a result of that pain to avoid any exposure to any movement or activity at all, we risk becoming further sensitized to the pain response when we do engage in activity. And it creates this vicious cycle where pain leads to less movement leads to more pain, and as a result, I end up potentially not exercising or cooking or playing video games or playing an instrument or whatever the activities are that I love to do. And so a really key part of rehab is trying to make sure that we don't enter into this vicious cycle, and if we do fall into it, learning how to break free of it. So two questions arise here. Why do we experience pain? And to what degree do we need to listen to pain that's present with activity? So to answer the first, I want you to think of an empty cup, and that cup represents your capacity for tolerating the various stressors and loads in your life. And it gets filled with things like exercise and physical activity. It gets filled with injuries and acute tissue inflammation, inadequate sleep and nutrition, emotional stress and worrying, drinking, smoking, if that's relevant for you. Pain can be thought to occur when the space in the cup runs out and the cup overflows. And so in many regards, this isn't something that we can objectively measure, but we can decrease the degree to which some of these stressors are being poured into the cup. So we can decrease physical activity loads if appropriate. We can remove ourselves from high stress situations and environments if that's applicable. We can decrease smoking or alcohol intake if that's relevant. And we can also increase the size of the cup itself. And so you need to consider across what realms can you attain a higher level of health. This will be very specific to you. Is it improving your conditioning levels so that you can better tolerate the physical activity demands of your lifestyle? Is it improving your sleep quality and quantity so that you are more well-rested and have greater capacity to tolerate the stressors of the day? Or is it learning more flexible stress coping strategies such that you are able to not spend all day in a high stress state? This is going to be very, very, very specific to your needs. And then when we think about to what degree do we want to continue with activity if we are experiencing pain? This is also going to be a very individualized decision. And we want to make this decision on a very case-by-case basis. There's an infinite number of factors that we might refer to, but there's kind of three big considerations that I would make. So the first is there a risk of catastrophic, potentially further tissue damage to the area? So maybe I'm out on a run, I trip, I fall, and all of a sudden my potentially broken ankle is quite painful to weight bear. You probably don't want to keep on running on it. However, maybe I'm rearranging the living room furniture and I suffer a mild strain in my bicep, and I find that swinging a golf club is only a 2 out of 10 on the pain scale. It might be very reasonable to continue with that activity, but just lessen it to a more reasonable degree. So maybe I go out to the driving range for 30 minutes rather than the 4 hours that some of my friends like to go out and spend at the driving range. The second consideration is how important is the task or the goal to you. So you may very well want to win your soccer tournament, or you're dead set on rearranging the living room furniture, and you feel that it is in your best interest to go with absolutely everything that your heart can muster, despite the fact that the pain is present. And you might also decide the opposite, that you want to put aside the activity until later, you don't want to risk further aggravation to the injury, and that's totally fine too, extremely valid, and probably more so recommended from the physio and rehab side of things. But I also like to use the example here of the athlete whose funding is predicated on their participation, and that might drive them to do the thing that they're trying to do despite pain being present, because it's going to determine their ability to make a living. And this is no different than when we show up to work and we are dealing with strains or aches or sprains. Our ability to make a living is predicated on being present at our jobs, and that might drive some of our participation through pain. As a third guideline, as a rough consideration, we can also use a traffic light system. So 0 to 10, 0 is no pain at all, 10 is the worst that pain could possibly be. Generally speaking, we want to stay away from a 6 or higher. That's a red light. It's not going to be very productive or advantageous for us to spend time there. 0 to 3, to me, is a green light. So there's a little bit of wiggle room. It's not just 0, but the pain has to be reasonable. It has to be tolerable, sustainable over a period of time. And in the middle, we have our 4 to 5, our yellow lights. So some yellow lights, you hit the gas, you drive through the intersection. Some yellow lights, you hit the brakes, you stop what you're doing. We're paying attention to things like, does the pain change with repetition? Does it increase? Does it decrease? Does it stay the same? And the second consideration with the yellow light is how long does it take for the pain to settle back down to your baseline following the yellow light activity? So ultimately, this is going to be a case-by-case, individualized decision every single time. But if you move your body, which you all did because you all made it here today, you are going to have to answer these questions at some point or another and make these decisions. And that brings me to a really, really important point for today. If you are dealing with pain, what are the strategies that you can use to stay consistent with activity and move forward despite the fact that you might be in pain? And the reason you want to be able to have an answer to this is because, like I mentioned before, the longer you stay away from activity, the weaker your muscles get, the more deconditioned your body becomes, the more your confidence is going to plummet, and the more sensitive your body will become to movement or activity in general. So there's 3 very straightforward strategies that I like to use here. The first is, when we're dealing with pain that is present during a given position in a movement, we can limit the range of motion of that movement such to avoid getting exposed to that exacerbating or aggravating position. So the example here is, instead of doing a squat and sitting all the way down, I place a box underneath me so as to limit the range of motion of that movement. And that might then very well provide me a sustainable entry point with which to continue with that motion. And I might use that if I have quad tendonitis or quad strain, some sort of knee injury. And so there's a couple different circumstances we would use this strategy. The first is, pain is present during a particular position, like I just mentioned. It hurts to lift my shoulders all the way over my head, but maybe taking some dumbbells and doing a front raise up to a shoulder height is a very sustainable and pain-tolerant or maybe pain-free strategy. Great, now I have an entry point with which that I can progress and get stronger and stay consistent with activity. The second reason I might use this is if I have a particular weak position during a movement. So by limiting the range of motion to or around that position, that's going to allow me to target that position specifically such that I can build control and competency throughout that position or throughout that range. And the third would be is if there is a joint that lacks the prerequisite mobility for the movement. So some people's knees just don't bend past 90 degrees, and we're not going to force them to go all the way down to the bottom of a squat. And the reason this strategy works is because it allows you to have an entry point for activity without consistently exposing yourself to an aggravating or inappropriate degree of pain. But where this strategy falls short is that strength is a position-specific quality. So we get stronger in and around the positions that we train, and long-term avoiding range of motion may contribute to muscular imbalances. It might contribute to limited mobility. And so we want to gradually and progressively, as best as we can, increase the range of motion that we're training movements through over time. The second strategy is that when pain is present with a given amount of weight that's being used, we can lengthen the tempo of the movement such to ensure that that movement is still fatiguing but without needing to use anywhere near as much weight. So the example would be on a push-up or on a squat, I can lengthen the ascent or the descent of the movement to 3 or 5 or 10 seconds, and maybe even hold a 3, 5, or 10-second hold in the bottom of the movement. Over the course of a set of 10, we've instantly made that movement significantly harder. And so we might use this in a couple of situations. One is pain limits the amount of weight that you can lift, which is probably the most common thing that will happen after an injury. You might be limited to an easy weight, but we can still use that easy weight in a very challenging manner. The second would be higher power and higher speed movements are contributing to pain, and we can slow down the movement such to work on developing control and competency throughout the positions that we're being exposed to, similar to the last strategy. And the third reason we might use this is if we're trying to increase the difficulty of a given movement, but we're limited in terms of what sorts of weights we have access to. This is a great way to improve the difficulty of this. And the reason we might want to use this strategy, the reason it works, is because lengthening the tempo will increase the fatigue of the movement. And fatigue is the thing that is going to be the driver of change. It's the thing that will make your muscles stronger. It's the thing that will make your tissues more resilient. So if we can have a strategy where we can make things fatigued, but in a manner that it doesn't hurt excessively, great, now we have an entry point to movement. Where this strategy doesn't necessarily work is when we're trying to expose our body to higher power or higher speed movements and develop capacity there because we're intentionally slowing down the motion. And it's also not going to specifically prepare you for higher load movements since we're intentionally using lighter weights here. The third strategy is that we can modify the position of the movement such to bring the load closer to our center of mass. And we might do this, I was giving the example before of holding a box at shoulder height. We might want to hold the box closer to the shoulders as opposed to far away from the shoulders because this is going to be a more sustainable position. And it goes back to the idea that we want to prevent the load from exceeding the capacity that the structure has. And this is a great way to do so. So we might use this if we have a specific task that we have to do at work, where there's this object, we know it's 20 to 30 pounds, and I'm going to have to lift it 4 times an hour, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. We probably want to do that task in as sustainable and as tolerable of a manner as possible, which also means performing the movement efficiently. So lifting the weight up to my shoulders and walking it forward so that I can make use of my legs and my hips, as opposed to reaching forward and putting excessive strain on my shoulders and my back. We also might use this strategy if we're dealing with an injury that exists in an area that's sensitive to leverage or torque, like the shoulders or the back. And so the reason that this strategy works is it allows you to produce movements more efficiently. We can use more muscles to perform the movement, which is going to make it a sustainable task. However, where this strategy falls short is that it's not going to prepare you potentially for specific positions that you might need to train. So if you need to lift an object and put it far in front of you because there's a 30-foot drop beneath your feet for whatever reason, we might actually want to practice that movement progressively and sustainably such that we develop tolerance for it. So we're going to navigate here a discussion briefly for the last 2 or 3 slides here around how do you move forward in a smart and productive manner and take control of your injuries when you're injured. And the reality here is when you are dealing with an injury, you are going to be the driver of the car on the injury road trip, not your surgeon or your coach or your physio or your caregiver. Ultimately, it's you. And it's really helpful to know that before you turn the keys to the ignition versus when you're barreling down the highway at 120 kilometers an hour. And this is really important because injuries have a strong potential to affect our identity. Part of our identity is tied to the things that we do. And so what happens when you suddenly can't participate in an activity that you spend 2 or 4 or 8 or 12 hours or more a week participating in? Injuries have a really strong potential to affect our mental health. And so as a result, it's really, really, really important when injured to find the big wins. And these are going to be different for everyone. You have to engage in a goal-setting process. There has to be an incremental, active pursuit of progression that is aimed towards clear objectives, and this will drive the rehab process. And these goals have to be defined by measurable parameters. So let's say I have a knee injury and I'm unable to squat, and as a result, my ability to participate in my lower body training activity regime is limited. And let's say I also identify that one of my weak links is my upper body strength. So I decide that, well, I'm going to work back up to being able to squat again pain-free. I'm going to spend time working on that upper body strength. And so in the long term, the goal might be, I'm going to squat 90% of my pre-injury weight for 3 repetitions in 5 months' time. But in the short term, my goal might be, I'm going to perform 2 to 3 assisted pull-ups with a band 2 to 3 times a week for 2 months' time. And so while I'm unable to squat, I still have this semi-complementary objective that will drive total body strength. And this is going to give you a clear path to steer along that's ultimately aimed towards a state of recovery. And that short-term goal could also be relating to the lower body. I'm just using the example of total body strength here. Taking an active approach throughout all of this means that we have to continue maximizing participation in meaningful activities. So this goes back to this notion of do what you can when you can. You have to explore the question, where can you improve while appropriately managing the risk of further aggravation to the injury? And it might be improving your flexibility, improving your strength, improving your grip strength more specifically, or your trunk strength, or your leg strength. It could be addressing mental links like confidence with the use of visualization and mental rehearsal techniques. And this is in significant contrast to a passive approach, doing nothing, wait and see, I'm just going to rest until it feels better. The reason we want to take an active approach is because it will further promote your autonomy and your self-efficacy. You get to feel good about the fact that you are taking active steps forward versus just sitting around and waiting for things to happen. And it will also facilitate a faster recovery because your body gets to maintain or maybe even improve certain other aspects of fitness. Ultimately, every single time you're injured, you don't know how long an injury is going to take to heal. And so you want to maintain as high of a level of fitness as you can, particularly when that injury might have an unpredictable timeline associated with it. So the goal here is to control what you can control, which means taking ownership and subsequent action in a given situation. So I've spoken to you today about a number of the factors that involve the physical, the mental, and even briefly the nutritional contributors to health. And unfortunately, in our conventional medical system, it doesn't really exist under the guise of optimal collaboration between these areas. You go see your physio, you go see your therapist, you go see your dietitian, and these things tend to happen in 3 very discrete or more discrete silos from one another. So down over on Beach Road and Gage, which is probably about 5 or 6 minutes from here, we offer a very unique approach to health and well-being at eFit Institute, which is a little different than how the conventional system typically works, and in my humble opinion, is an unbelievably better way to address nutritional health and nutritional, physical, and mental health conditions. So we take a multidisciplinary approach that combines the mental, the physical, and the nutritional, taking an approach that incorporates and collaborates all 3 of these realms under one roof. If this is something that anybody watching wants some information you're welcome to scan the QR code virtually, or send an email, or check out our website. And then the last 2 resources that I'll leave you with here are a nicely summarized version, set of notes around all of the things that we've spoken about today in a very clean and digestible format. And then the last piece is, if you are somebody who's dealing with your own injuries or in pursuit of your own health and fitness goals, and you're looking to explore the conversation around where you're at and where you're trying to get to and what might be holding you back from getting there, and looking for some guidance and accountability, I'm also more than happy to offer a virtual consultation in order to have that conversation in a more intimate one-on-one setting. If you have any other questions as well, you're welcome to email me after after watching this, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have. So thanks for coming.
I keep injuring my back over and over again, and it seems like it's just very fragile and stupid little movements. Like, I was interested in your load versus capacity.
Yeah.
But it's unpredictable, because I can go and play 18 holes of golf and my back is fine.
Sure.
And then I can reach for a bar of soap in the bathtub, or put my pants on the wrong way, and then I'm crippled for 2 months.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's very weird how injuries sometimes happen, and then, like, I'll keep coming to work, I'll ice, heat, I'll walk every day, I'll try to do different physio stretches in the morning, but it seems to go on and on and on, and I don't understand. Like, I'm sure I have lots of osteoarthritis down there, and I herniated disc on the other side 15 years ago. But I just, sometimes I just don't know what's going to
Sure.
make it happen.
Sure,
And
sure,
I
sure.
don't know how long it's going to last. Sometimes I can do ice and heat and it's done in a couple of days, but then sometimes it can go on for weeks and weeks and weeks.
Yeah.
But I agree totally with you have to keep moving, you have to keep trying to do things. Sometimes I worry all the physio I try to do sometimes makes it worse.
Sure.
It hurts more afterwards.
Sure, absolutely.
But then I think, well, if I don't do anything, then I'm never going to get better. So I was kind of in this no man's land of
I call it rehab purgatory. That's what I call it.
I just don't understand what I'm doing or not doing that's making it happen or making it, and I don't know how to get a handle on it. Like if I knew every time you did such and such, you're at risk of this happening, then I would avoid doing such and such. But sometimes it's so innocuous,
Yeah.
the movement that I've done.
Absolutely.
And then it can go on for weeks, and then it doesn't happen at other times where it would make more sense if it did. So it's the unpredictability, I think, is really hard, and how long it can take, even when you're trying to do all the things right.
Yeah, 100%. So so the first piece is kind of what I was saying before. These things are multifaceted. Sometimes it's dependent on what's the activity that you did. Sometimes we might want to pay attention to, was it a day that I slept poorly? Was there high stress during that season of my life? And some of these things might be measurable. Some of them might not be. There might be this element of unpredictability. One of the other things that I would go to is there a way that you're measuring your parameters for progress? Like, are you measuring, whether formally or subjectively, like how much golf you can tolerate typically, how much weight might be reasonable for you to lift up if you're doing a day-to-day task around the house? And can we seek out progression in that, typically via the use of strengthening? So is there a movement that we can find that is fatiguing but tolerable? And can we practice that movement, something probably pertaining to the back or the hips? Can we progress that movement in a way that, hey, 8 reps was previously pretty hard. Now, 4 weeks later, 12 reps is the same degree of difficulty that the 8 reps was, or 20 reps is the same degree of difficulty that the 8 reps was. And so we want to have a couple of different ways that we're looking at progression or progress in whatever format is appropriate to you. From a physio standpoint, I would want to look at what are the different things that are maybe challenging or fatiguing or strenuous potentially on the back. What is the appropriate entry point for that? So if, let's say there was a very clear cut, like every time I lift 50 pounds, it hurts. But every time I lift my phone off the ground, if I drop it, it doesn't hurt. So we have 2 data points. We have 1 pound is not painful, 50 pounds is painful. Maybe we practice with 10 pounds to develop some tolerance, then 15, then 20, then 25, working up to the tolerance of what you would need for your specific lifestyle. There certainly is a degree of unpredictability where you're saying, hey, 18 holes of golf feels totally fine, but reaching for the bar of soap, all of a sudden that's the painful task. If it were consistently with reaching tasks, what I might be inclined to look at is what is the tolerance that your back has for reaching tasks? And that kind of goes back to that thing I was talking about with we typically want to make a movement as easy on ourselves as possible. But if there's a movement we have to perform specifically, let's say where the soap sits is always 7 feet in front of you for whatever reason. It's a weirdly shaped bathtub. You might potentially, or let's say that's the only place to put the soap, we might actually want to develop tolerance for that motion by practicing it repetitively in a manner where the load is limited.
It doesn't happen in the same way all the time.
Sure.
This time, I'd done all sorts of work in the garden 3 weeks earlier, 2 months earlier even, in the spring. Was careful about doing all of that, and then like 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was just sort of standing beside an urn, and I was just kind of leaning over trying to pull off all this stuff.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I felt a twinge.
Yeah, everything seizes up.
and then I'm like, oh my God, all I was doing was leaning over. But I go swimming. I swim every Saturday. I walk every night after work. I haven't played golf this year, but I would normally be playing golf and walking 9 holes and pulling a cart.
Yeah.
And
maybe what Daniel's saying is that it does really have to do with like like your cortisol level and like the external stressors that you have, right? Like if you've had a particularly difficult day on the unit, and that's when you find that you have that back pain from doing a more repetitive motion, that stress metabolizes in the body or metastasizes in the body when you're trying to do regular day-to-day tasks.
I think the thing that I would be most interested in, based on what you're saying, is
I've just had an MRI. I'm very interested.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Generally speaking, most people are not, and I'm making a very general statement, most people are not as strong as we need them to be. So we might find that for most tasks that you do, you're totally able to support the various loads you need to, pulling the golf carts, lifting the plant pots, etc. When we go into a provocative position to the low back, I'm leaning this one system in question, so we're kind of zooming into the muscular area of the low back. Maybe those specific muscles don't have capacity for that task. And so we might, exactly.
Stupid little task.
100%. So I was giving the example at the very beginning of, so load versus capacity. The load might be exceeded in the moment. I trip and fall on the ice. I lift up something heavy. There might also be this chronic exceeding of capacity over time. Like that's more in the case of like a tendonitis. But let's say we're standing up nice and tall. The muscles on our back, in our back, are just working to keep us upright. And all of a sudden I do this far lean and reach. For, not to say that that's probably what you were doing, but like just to give an example, the load that's present on my back here is so much higher than it is here. If we all of a sudden add a load, bar of soap, plant pots, whatever the thing might be, and it exceeds the capacity, that might be the straw that breaks the camel's back, metaphorically speaking, in that moment. But the solution is twofold. In the short term, we want to decrease load. So when things hurt, we don't do the excessively painful thing. And then in the long term, we want to build up capacity over time. So if we do... Exactly. And maybe it's the back more specifically. Maybe it's the back and the hips working collectively. If we have this pattern of injury where, hey, it seems like it's always the back. It's always the low back. Okay, well then that's definitely the thing that we would want to pay attention to strength and capacity for. And it doesn't necessarily mean I don't need you to deadlift 400 pounds, but I do need you to be trusting and confident in your back's ability to do the things that you're asking of it, which might start with some low load strengthening activities that we absolutely would have to progress over time. Where I feel that traditional physio will fall short is you get your stretches, you get your very low level exercises, and you kind of get back to some degree of pain tolerant, pain-free moving, but the baseline that you get up to when physio tends to discharge you is the position that you were probably in when you first got injured in the first place, and you fall into this rehab purgatory kind of cycle where you're going back and forth.
Right.
Yeah.
I get less compliant the better I am.
Sure, absolutely. Why are we doing the thing that's supposed to take us away from pain when the pain goes away?
When I'm in pain.
Absolutely, and that's human nature. So there's a lot of discussion around, at least what I will do in my practice is we're chatting a lot around like, do you understand why we're doing these things? Right. Is this actually, we want to make sure that we understand, if I'm giving you a series of things to do, it's not just, hey, do this thing because Dan told you to do it. It's, do you have an understanding of why it's actually important to be doing it and why we're going to want to do it beyond just the pain disappearing? And if that lack of understanding is not yet there, like that's the treatment intervention, is the discussion around the education. To a large degree, it doesn't matter what exercises we do. As long as the muscles are getting fatigued, you could do a deadlift, you could do a side reach, I could give you a band exercise, it could be a bridge. Like there's no one magic exercise, but we do want to make sure that the area in question, the system in question, like I was chatting about before, can tolerate the load that's being imposed on you based on your day-to-day demands. Absolutely.
Right, but then other times it's doing way more than...
Sure. And our capacity fluctuates. Our capacity definitely fluctuates,
yeah,
right? Like
leaning over or like putting my pants on. About 6 months ago, I was at another hospital, and I got up quickly from a chair to go to a meeting. Now, it turned out the chair was 50 years old and it wasn't supporting my back properly. This goes to the functioning equipment piece I was chatting about. But I got up quickly to go to a meeting, and all of a sudden it's like,
yeah.
And then I'm like in absolute agony.
Yeah.
And then off work for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And I have perfect work attendance.
Sure.
But I was totally crippled.
Yeah.
So I just couldn't.
That's probably really tough for you mentally as well, right? Because you're like, I'm a good worker, I have good attendance.
Yeah.
It's really difficult for me to be an injured person.
But like I was putting so much heat and ice on my back actually burned my back. But it took a good, and lots of physio,
Yeah.
lots of time to get rid of it. But it can just be these innocuous
Yeah.
things, and then I can swim every week, or I can play golf. I'm not a problem.
Sure.
But my golf swing is funny because I think I guard, so I don't turn my whole body the way I probably
Yeah.
if I was really performing. But
I think strengthening would be the direction that I would take in that regard. Again, finding things that are fatiguing, practicing them until they become easier, and then finding progressively harder things. So the analogy that I give sometimes to people is like strength is a skill like learning a language is a skill. If I wanted to learn French, I'd start with the 10 most common words in the French language. That's probably where I'd start first. I'd practice them day after day. After a couple days or a week or so, I'm ready to learn the next 10 most common words and then the 10 after that. If I only practice bonjour, comment ça va bien, and I don't expand my vocabulary, I don't progress the difficulty of the exercises, I'm going to hit this ceiling effect of where my strength is at with regards to what we're talking about for your back, and I'm never going to get beyond that. So traditional physio, you get your band exercise, you get really good at doing 3 sets of 10 clamshells with the hips. But if you don't go beyond that, the reality is the demands of your day-to-day life, lifting up a 30-pound plant pot is way more physically demanding than a banded exercise 3 sets of 10. So we have to progress beyond after we get to that point of discharge from traditional physio.
But like standing up from a chair should not be making me cripple.
It shouldn't be, absolutely. So we might want to think about hip and low back strength.
Pull off some dead plants.
Yeah. It shouldn't be, that's right.
It might also be like physio.
Strange position or strange angle or
Maybe
something.
there's something else going on in the body that you just don't know about. Your MRI might have some results. And I was going to say, at EFIT, they also have an osteopath.
Well, can you go there?
Yeah.
I frequent the community there. They're really awesome because I don't know if your nurses know, but they allow folks to use their mental health benefits to have access to the entire gym program. So folks who use their mental health benefits to join the gym get access to Daniel, to a personal trainer, somatics and lymphatics classes, and a nutritionist as well.
Okay.
So it's a really cool program. If you had any, do you have a card or anything with you?
I have a personal card.
I think I have the.
Okay, awesome. And as well, I was going to say, we work with their osteopath.
I'm in Burlington. Do you have anything? You don't have anything.
We don't know. We're just based out of Beach Road and Gage. It's
Okay.
probably about 10, 15 minutes from Burlington.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's got a really cool mural on the side. But so in addition to like what they do, so you could always have an osteopathic or a physio consult.
Yeah.
The osteopath from their clinic also comes to HHS. So the next time that they're at HHS here at SPH is Tuesday, August 5th. If you're interested in having an osteo assessment.
No, I'm retiring in 2 weeks.
Oh.
Yeah. But I've been dealing with this pain for a couple months, so I was really, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you want to shoot me an email afterwards, or like, I'm more than happy to chat about that or actually take a closer look if that feels relevant. Yeah, 100%.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
On to another meeting.